Very good evening. I'll get straight to the meat of my presentation this evening. But first and foremost, thank you, Mathrubhumi, for inviting me here, Mr. Shams Kumar, and your entire team. I'm deeply, deeply grateful to you and to Devika and Mayura and the whole team for allowing me to be here this evening. Well, there is a special meaning for me to be here with you in Thiruvananthapuram, in the company particularly of so many young people. My contact with Kerala over the past 25 years has contributed to my own growth and experiences of life. But there is a personal connect as well. My best friend, who also is my wife, Kalpana, spent a significant part of her childhood in Kasargod, where she studied at Durga High School. Hailing from Orissa, the family moved to the CPCRI, which was situated in the natural beauty of 100 acres of plantation. I will dwell on 4 aspects in our family's tryst with Kerala to set the stage for exploring how we reimagine India and find our moorings in fraternity as the constitutional soul. First, Kerala set the stage for being global, much before globalization became the buzzword. The cultural ethos of Kerala has shaped other parts within the nation and overseas. Human movements from Kerala to other parts has impacted on other cultures. It has been shaped by the human contact from elsewhere as well. Second, the inward and outward movement of human beings brings new ideas. It has fostered acceptance of a diversity of cultures, unrestrained by geographical and other barriers. It is a fundamental acceptance of a way of life which values living together in harmony. And what better symbol of that than in Thiruvananthapuram itself, where at the center, as they say, you have a temple, a mosque, and a church. And they say, as a very dear former student and intern of mine said, that it's lovely to see all of the 3 chilling out together. Third, Kerala has a tradition of generating movements of reform in the creation of a socially and politically responsive society. I have imbibed from my own spouse the constant churning of the soul, the desire to challenge the status quo and aspire for transformation. 6 sisters, as they are, were brought up with the freedom to fashion their own destinies. They fanned across various parts: Mangalore, Kochi, Delhi, Mumbai, Bengaluru, and of course London, Sheffield, San Diego, and Toronto. India is home to the world's largest population. Over 50% of the population is below the age of 25. 65% is below the age of 35. As the world's largest democracy with a youthful population, this era may easily come to be known as the age of India. The economists call it the demographic dividend. India, with its growing economy and global footprint, is well positioned to lead the world in community relations, technological development with the advent of artificial intelligence, and the global response to climate change. But staking claim to leadership requires targeted strategy and a moral and legal framework. Kerala has produced cinema which has confronted reality and demonstrated a refreshing openness to pursue new themes. Traveling away from Malayalam cinema, I wish to forewarn you that I will spill some spoilers on the film All We Imagine Is Light. Unlike the film, I'm giving you a choice before revealing too much. The award-winning movie depicts the journey of 3 unassuming women: Prabha, Anu, and Parvati. Prabha, the straight-laced and upright nurse, has had an arranged marriage with a man who came briefly from Germany and whose only contact with him is a rice cooker which he has sent her as a loving gift. Anu, another nurse, craves for privacy in her relationship with a Muslim man. She is liberated by her newfound intimacy, but perforce is compelled to keep it a secret. Parvati is a cook at a hospital who is at the receiving end of a failing battle against a builder set out to demolish her humble dwelling for high-rise development. So true about our larger cities. The movie shows the reality of injustice at three levels. At home in a room shared by three working women, at work and in society. Prabha, Anu and Parvati are aspirational and hard-working women. Their plight is not in a lack of self-care, but in the lack of community care. The three women find fraternity in each other. Their unique friendship becomes a source of support in trying times. Above all, it is a movie where women take charge of navigating their lives. Fraternity acquires a new woman as they navigate urban spaces, crowded local trains, cramped living accommodation, and an absence of spaces where love, something as elemental as love, can find expression freely. As their stories unravel, a viewer is exposed to social reality on the role of women, migrants, and interfaith couples. The movie is all about the vitality of mutual support and community care. Above all, the movie shows the strength of fraternity for women, finding the meaning of life in seemingly mundane experiences day to day. Our society is designed in concentric spheres to offer us support. At the primary level, we rely on our families. But where are the families where people are displaced from place to place? At the community level, we rely on those who are culturally similar. At the national level, we coalesce around a shared nationhood. But the society which we relied on to aid our craving for community care is divided by erosive chains of caste, gender, religion, and region. Our fraternities are instinctively divided in fraternities which threaten to keep us in silos. When India achieved her independence, this reality laid bare before the nation, which was witnessing a brutal partition and frictions between communities. In this context, it was that the framers of our Constitution laid out the soul of the Constitution in the virtue of fraternity. In another celebrated movie called Joyland, the director shows the infatuation of Haidar, a closeted married man, with his employer, who is a hijra dancer. Haidar's family forces his wife to leave her job to bear a child, while Haidar is forced to keep a secret of the nature of his employment under a hijra dancer. The reason behind both these family decisions is to protect the family from public humiliation and maintain their status as, quote unquote, respectable members of the community. One of the greatest feelings of regret which I came across as a judge of the High Court, as a Chief Justice of the Allahabad High Court, in the heartland of India, so to speak, as a judge of the Supreme Court, was how society dealt with rape. Rape was not regarded in so many cases as something which confronts the dignity, as an affront to the dignity of the woman. Rape was instead regarded as something which brings shame to a family. Now, is that really the movement of society which we see for the future? How do we frame the language of our discourse in our movement to an equal society? What works of art reflect, and some of the works of art which I have shared with you today, is a story as old as time. Our systems of support mirror the hierarchical and prejudicial nature of our society. These systems may be at odds with each other and lack shared interests between them. The conservative community where Haider lived was at odds with the community of the Hijras in the movie. Recently, a German newspaper investigated a group of 70,000 men on the texting app Telegram. Men in that group shared images and instructions to commit sexual assault and rape against women. This bone-chilling revelation has returned our focus on the locker room chats, one of which was also found among male students at a school in Delhi a few years ago. These groups rally men around a shared idea of toxic masculinity. In fact, I noticed that some of the finest movies in Malayalam cinema in 2024 have dwelt on this theme of toxic masculinity. Unfortunately, the idea of such a fraternity is to commit crime and perpetuate evils against women. These examples show the limitations of a notion of fraternity, which is opposed to constitutional values. The constitutional vision of fraternity is founded on an acceptance of human dignity as its core, of constitutional liberty. Liberty, equality, and freedom are the pathways to find meaning in the constitutional soul. Fraternity appeared since the French Revolution in the 18th century in political documents. In the face of a brute and apathetic monarchy, the people of France rallied to create a shared destiny for the common good. Constitutions in different parts of the world and conventions of the United Nations have used fraternity to rally a quest for unity behind shared values and ideas. In our Constitution, fraternity is an idea which prides diversity. Unlike the fraternity of living in silos based on caste, religion, and gender, constitutional fraternity envisions the preservation and celebration of our differences and affording to all members of the society the opportunity to contribute in the prosperity of the nation. Think of The Wizard of Oz by L. Frank Baum. A girl named Dorothy, a cowardly lion, a scarecrow, and Tin Man set out to find the Wizard of Oz. Dorothy wanted to return home. The cowardly lion wanted courage. The scarecrow wanted a brain, and the Tin Man desired a heart. These characters had lives and needs that could not be any more different. But together they strengthened their efforts and followed the yellow brick road to the Emerald City. Our Constitution has set out its own yellow brick road. You know this great song, The Yellow Brick Road? At least my generation was very fond of it. Our Constitution has created its own yellow brick road by constituting democratic institutions premised on the rule of law and ensuring the fundamental rights of our citizens. The constitutional Emerald City is to create an egalitarian society where the content of a person's character triumphs over narrow-minded prejudice. To succeed as a people, the Constitution envisions unity between different perspectives in the cause of reforming society through peaceful and democratic means. Our fraternal bond demands that we rise against injustice, not only against people who are similar, but especially when injustice befalls those who are dissimilar to us. As Adlai Stevenson said, a free society is a society where it is safe to be unpopular. Constitutional fraternity demands the assurance of dignity to all persons. Fraternity has been deployed as a constitutional instrument by the Supreme Court to protect reservation for disadvantaged communities, to uphold anti-discrimination law, and to create disability-inclusive procedures. Today, fraternity provides us an avenue for social cohesion and moral frameworks to deal with contemporary challenges. Artificial intelligence is reshaping every aspect of our life. Tax and accounting, healthcare, transportation, and personal preferences are just a few aspects at the forefront of this transformation, each grappling with unique challenges and opportunities. The rise of generative AI has eased our ability to create complex outputs by algorithms which analyze data sets on a magnitude and scale unknown to humans. AI, like the internet itself, has now becoming a public service essential for the members of a modern society. The concept of fraternity on various platforms with AI has two vital respects. First, the personal data of citizens on various platforms, which may be used without the active consent of our citizens for AI collation. Second, the misuse of AI for immoral acts. The privacy concerns undergirding AI have acquired a sense of urgency, with social media companies having entered the AI race. Meta owns WhatsApp, Instagram, Facebook, and the knockoff version of Twitter known as Threads. 3.29 billion active monthly users frequent at least one of Meta's social media platforms. The use of this data by Meta for enhancing its AI learning process can put the data of users at the risk of breach. Meta has been accused of allowing disinformation, misinformation, and hate speech to go unchecked. In some cases, this has abetted polarization, even affecting election outcomes. Social media has thus created a post-truth world where the only thing that matters is who speaks louder and not who speaks rationally. From a policy perspective, fraternity demands strengthening the legal framework in home countries of social media platforms to avoid concentration of social media capabilities in a few oligarchs. Fraternity also demands that moral and ethical rules of public discourse be made applicable to social media so that they do not become agents of spreading hate and polarization. The use of AI to aid discriminatory policies and execute crime is a real possibility against which we must stand guard. AI is currently facing the problem of under-regulation on the global stage, and India is no exception. Fraternity demands that AI be grown and then be used ethically. It requires us to enter into a global dialogue on the state of our ethical infrastructure under which AI may be allowed to grow without monopolizing it. While the AI Action Summit is slated to be held in Paris this month, the devil lies in the fine print. Recently, the success of Chinese generative AI, DeepSeek R1, has sent shockwaves across the Western world, even leading to a drastic fall in the value of shares. While this AI model matches the capabilities of advanced models made by American companies, such as OpenAI's O1, what sets it apart is that it is open source, free to use, and cost effective. The non-monopolizing nature of DeepSeek's success in a fraction of the cost of ChatGPT demonstrates how access to computing technologies can be pursued. There is a lesson in it for India as well. What consequence will this have on fraternity in the realm of ideas and human advancement? I'm not a soothsayer to attempt an answer to this question. Humanity has shared concerns in today's interconnected world. Fraternity of ideas and democratization of technology is essential to meaningfully engage with each other to find solutions. While generative AI creates a new world, the scale of investment in resources has led to carbon emissions and distorted electricity grids due to the heavy resource usage of data centers. Climate change has caused dire consequences globally, with a serious impact on fraternity. We experience the change of climate due to human activities. We are also experiencing climate disasters, which are marked by sudden and devastating events. The fires that swept California, the landslides in Wayanad, the heat wave in Delhi last summer, and a year's rainfall in a day in Dubai are demonstrations of climate disasters. With the rise in temperatures having breached the 1.5 degrees Celsius protocol set out in the Paris Agreement, we seek a global reimagining of fraternity. Fraternity in an area of climate change is a global responsibility in which no nation remains immune to action. To meet these challenges, fraternity demands us to create sustainable ways to mitigate climate change consequences. While climate change will not spare anyone, its first casualties will be the poor and marginalized communities. These will be the communities which depend on agriculture as subsistence, on the coastal communities in low-lying coastal areas of the globe. Fraternity demands us to show our sense of solidarity for our country and for our world by showing love and compassion for the concerns of global humanity's most vulnerable people. Africa is not just another continent. People across the world are connected to each other. In the survival of all of us, we find our own path to survival. This requires us to value the progress and equality of others. It beseeches us to bother when others are in distress. As the world's largest repository of youth, talent, and potential, the future of the world is for us to lead. I leave you with a question. What kind of a future do we see for ourselves? Do we accept a future where the narrow domestic walls redefine our social compact? Where disinformation and misinformation lead the world into a post-truth society, where the volume of your opinion matters more than its content? Are we comfortable in watching the world go by without addressing the ethical concerns over AI? Will future generations cast blame on us as their forebears that we took little action individually as a society and as a global community to mitigate the efforts and effects of climate change? The soul of our Constitution is fraternity. The phrase was adopted by the framers of the Constitution who were responding to their times. The content of the phrase fraternity is left to us to define. The meaning which we will give will alter as times change. Fraternity holds an expansive potential as it witnesses changes in society and the world around us. Fraternity transcends the realm of social relations, ideas, solutions, and possibilities. A fraternal spirit rooted in the morality of the Constitution offers us insightful solutions to build a world where all people can stake claim to its ownership and privileges. Our ability to survive as a community, as a nation, and as humanity depends on how we deal with the barriers which we have created and which barriers have overtaken us. Let us commit ourselves to the spirit of fraternity, not merely as an ideal, but as a way of life which shapes our society, our institutions, and our shared future, so that we may build a world where justice, dignity, and solidarity are not privileges, but something as basic as a birthright. Thank you very much.
Good evening, sir. Of course, the society has a responsibility to protect the fraternity as envisaged in the Constitution. But my question is, which of the 4 pillars of democracy in India is forcing us now to focus more on this debate on fraternity as the constitutional soul? Which of the four pillars is forcing us now to debate on this, in your experience?
I don't think the 4 pillars are forcing us to debate about fraternity. Fraternity was adopted as a part of the framing process of the Constitution itself. In fact, there is this classical story about how Dr. Ambedkar, in the course of the debates in the Constituent Assembly, walked into the Constituent Assembly and pulled out a sheet of paper from his pocket which had the word fraternity written on it and which was eventually made a part of the Constitution. But Dr. Ambedkar really said that though fraternity has been used in various historical contexts, like the French Revolution, where they spoke about liberty, equality, and fraternity, he says fraternity in the Indian context is truly a very different concept. And I think what has happened over the last 75 years is that the whole discourse on fraternity has changed. For one thing, fraternity has, as the word indicates, a masculine origin. Because, as you know, fraternities in the US, for instance, were these fraternities of these boys' clubs in educational institutions. But fraternity now, as we understand it, over the last 75 years, has changed in content. It incorporates equal rights for women, but beyond just gender, for the transgenders, for the marginalized. So what has happened really in answer to your question is, as our experiential learning over the last 75 years has changed through what we have experienced in the unfolding of our democracy, these concepts like fraternity have themselves undergone a change. And therefore I said at the end that our framers gave content to the meaning of fraternity from the perspective which they understood. For us today, fraternity is a very different concept based on the challenges which we face today. And therefore, I also have suggested that we move from the individual to the social, and from the social to the global, as new challenges like AI, the internet, social media, and climate change have completely dawned on us. And to expect that we find answers to these problems only in institutions would, I think, be an underestimation of the democratic process. The true answers must lie in civil society itself, because it's really civil society which is the originator of social movements, of the debate for change, and which can then really, in that sense, lead to reimagining our institutions as well in the quest for achieving fraternity.
Sir, across the world, democracies are struggling with deepening social divisions, be it racial tensions in the US, Brexit in the UK, or majoritarian nationalism in India. Given this reality, do you believe the very idea of fraternity is under existential threat in modern democracy? And what role can the judiciary play in reviving it?
There have always been challenges to fraternity in different parts of the world. You had challenges to fraternity in the course of the Second World War. The violations of human rights which took place in the course of the Second World War were a clear negation of fraternity itself, right? But there have been movements which have arisen as a result. Now, when you come, say, to a more recent times, say the Arab Spring created a ground for hope, a hope in democracy. Then you found a backsliding post the Arab Spring in different parts of the world. So in that sense, there is a cyclical movement between, on the one hand, the accumulation of power and the citizens' quest for freedom. And I think in that tension between power and those who seek accountability and responsiveness, a new synthesis can emerge, which in that sense highlights, to my mind, the most important value which citizens play. True enough, every organization, every institution in democracy has its vital role assigned to it. Parliament and the state legislatures have vital roles as sources for a reasoned dialogue of different viewpoints. The courts have a very vital role to play in testing the legitimacy of governmental action, in testing the validity of laws which Parliament may enact. But I would not stop at just entrusting the entire responsibility to Parliament and Parliament, the state legislatures, and the judiciary. And my whole theme is that there is so much more which can be done by civil society I'll give you a concrete example. The Supreme Court decriminalized homosexuality in the judgment in Navteej Johar's case. Now, the decriminalization of homosexuality by the Supreme Court set in motion a whole era of transformation and acceptance in society. But then came the quest for marriage equality, where the Supreme Court said this is an area where Parliament has to intervene. Now, if Parliament doesn't intervene, as it won't presently, there's nothing to show that there is anything before Parliament, civil society has a very active role to play in generating a greater degree of acceptance of different relationships, of non-familial relationships. And therefore, we must, as citizens, understand our own role, because it is when we accept our responsibilities that we only stop blaming the institutions for an institutional failure. If there is a certain deficit, that deficit must lie in civil society as well, particularly in the context of democratic governance. Yeah, there's somebody at the end, I think.
Sir, good morning. Sir, good afternoon. So my question is not related to fraternity, it's outside the syllabus. It's about the backlog of cases. Like if we, in 1 year, we have many lakhs of cases. Like for example, in Supreme Court, if we have 23 or 59,000 cases, in high courts, we have lakhs of cases which we have to solve. Even if people have faith in this Supreme Court, it's just an indicator, because we all feel that it has to be solved, because this law or this law is not just about a sovereign function, but it is also an essential service. So I would like to know what is your vision to solve this kind of problem that we are facing years back.
First and foremost, I completely agree. I mean, your question had a certain ethical statement, and I completely agree with you. And I'll give you a concrete example. What happens if a marital couple gets into a matrimonial, dispute? They may be 26, 28 when they get into a dispute. If they don't see an end to their dispute until they turn 40, what happens to that couple? By the time you're 40, you've completely changed into a new life, right? So I completely agree with you. Or suppose in a state like Uttar Pradesh, a crime takes place in the 1980s, and the appeal of the accused is still to see the light of the day. There you have, again, a complete failure of justice, both to society and to the accused. Society has a vital stake, and the accused has a stake in their own liberty. Now, what I want to do is to very briefly answer your question by telling you that last year, 61,000 cases were filed in the Supreme Court. 34 judges in 2024 disposed of 59,700 cases. So the disposal of cases in the Supreme Court was almost at par with the filing, give or take 1,000 cases. But there is so much that we can do, so much that courts can't do. What we can't do is to increase our own infrastructure. The judge-to-population ratio in India is abysmally low. We require new courts, we require new infrastructure, we require additional judges. But there again, the problem is you also need good judges. You just don't need to fill up positions, right? You need to have competent judges, trained judges. Technology, which I spoke about, has a very vital role to play. You can use artificial intelligence not to decide cases. I'm very reluctant about allowing AI to take control over the decisions of cases. But you can certainly use AI for better knowledge management, better management of caseloads, by grouping cases together which have common issues. And a lot of work has been done on this front. There's been a digital transformation of the Indian judiciary. A lot of it, of course, is to take the work of the courts to the homes of people. For instance, we have been live streaming cases. So everything that happens in the Supreme Court, particularly in the important cases, is taken to people. People can watch what is going on. We are translating judgments of the Supreme Court, which were only in English, into every Indian language recognized by the Constitution, using AI-assisted software. So some of these are initiatives to take the work of the court to the people at large. But yes, I think the answer really to your question has to be that governments have to make proper allocations in terms of budgetary resources to the Indian judiciary. Once that is done, I think a large part of this issue would be dealt with effectively.
Good evening, sir. Sir, myself Akshay Vishnath, and I'm a UPSC aspirant. Sir, whenever we write for UPSC answers, sir, one of the demerits of the judiciary when it always comes to the appointment of judges, sir. So, questioning one, sir. Sir, while the constitution ensures checks and balances, the judiciary always holds a sway on judicial appointments. Sir, does the NJAC verdict and the collegium dominance disturb power balance, or it safeguards judicial independence, sir?
You know, the collegium system of appointing judges is not a system by which judges appoint judges. I mean, there's a misperception, there's a misunderstanding about the whole nature of the system. It's a system which has checks and balances. The recommendations for appointment to the high courts originate at the level of the high courts. It is vetted by the state governments, namely the chief minister of every state. It is also vetted by the government of India, which does a complete analysis of the antecedents of every candidate before it comes to the Supreme Court of India. So, since we are a federal country, the process of appointment involves different tiers of government, namely these high courts, the state governments, the union government, and the Supreme Court of India. Now, so far as the district judiciary is concerned, appointments to the district judiciary are made through a competitive selection process. You have public examinations which are conducted in every state, including the state of Kerala, for the appointment of judges to the district judiciary. And one interesting thing which I'd like to share with the audience is that in so many states across the country, the number of women who are now entering the district judiciary at the lowest levels has far exceeded 50%. In many states, it's gone to 60% or 70%. And, you know, this is just an indicator that when you create a level playing field for women, for too long, appointments, particularly to judicial offices, were through an old boys network. When you sort of scuttle an old boys network or a closely held or privileged club and make it an equal platform for all segments of citizens to apply for, you find the net results. And therefore, you see that there is a great democratization of access to the judiciary at the lowest levels taking place. And by, these people will then come to the fore maybe in the next 10 years or a decade and a half.
Sir, good evening, sir. So, sir, I recently read a news article that said that in Mexico, with like a new judicial reform, like they have like a system wherein the judges would be elected by the people. And
the judges are
going to be elected by the people, like in India, where we have members in parliaments are being elected. So the thing is that even in India, we have this sense of populism when it comes to justice. Like people, even with judicial proclamation, people have this idea of this should not have been the decision. Like this is injustice, this is just something else. That there's a sense that justice is being disconnected from people at large, or like the popular sentiment at large. And at what, I mean, do you think there is an extent to which justice should be associated with like a populist sentiment, or where do you think you should draw the line? Like, okay, what people think is justice, or what the system of constitution and everything says justice is?
Yeah, I got your question. You know, speaking for myself, I would be very fearful of a system in which judges are elected by people. Because you know what happens in many countries of the world, including the US, where judges are elected by people, all kinds of self-interest groups, pressure groups, including corporate-funded attempts, are made then to elect judges of their choice. So you don't obviously want judges to be elected by people, because then that will bring in the whole issue of the funding to elect judges, which is plaguing so many different parts of the world. Second, why do you not want elected judges? The reason is not that judges are not responsive to the people. Obviously, when a validity of an act of parliament or the state legislature is challenged before a court, there is what we call a presumption of constitutional validity, that a law is made by the elected representatives of the people. So the court will not lightly, as an ordinary course, set aside the law. But the reason why you have unelected judges who occupy judicial offices is that the voice of the judiciary represents, in that sense, the eternal values on which the society is founded. Namely, in our case, the quest for democracy, equality, liberty, and freedom. Many of our judgments, and I don't want to particularly name some of them, are in fact not, as you say, populist judgments. They are contrarian. In fact, many judgments perhaps buck the popular trend, because the judges then believe that, well, this reflects the eternal aspirations of the Constitution. And I think the strength of our system lies in the fact that judges are not elected, that the representatives of the people in the legislatures are elected, and there is this healthy check and balance which is devised by the Constitution.
Good afternoon, sir. I had a question pertaining to your personal, like your point of view when it comes to how the parliament, limits the judiciary. For example, you mentioned earlier that, when it comes to same-sex relationships, when it boiled over and finally down to the Supreme Court, it was left to the parliament, because without the parliament laying down laws, it wouldn't come into action. So I wanted to ask you, can you state a few judgments where the parliament's lawmaking capabilities has limited the judiciaries?
As a matter of first principle, when the court declares a law in a judgment, Parliament cannot step in and say that, well, this judgment is wrong, and we overrule the judgment. Parliament does not have that as a constitutional power, because that's well settled. So Parliament cannot enact a law which just nullifies a judgment. What Parliament can do, however, is to take away the basis of the judgment. For instance, if the Supreme Court strikes down a law on the ground that the law is unfair, it does not provide for compensation in adequate measure for the acquisition of property, Parliament can come in and supply the deficiency and cure the defect, right? That is permissible to Parliament. But I can equally tell you that there are quite a few instances where the Supreme Court was ahead of the legislature. One classical example is the protection of women from sexual harassment in the workplace, where we had no law at all. The Supreme Court, in its judgment in the Vishakha case, laid down guidelines for protection of women against sexual harassment in the workplace. And the Supreme Court said that this guideline will hold the field until Parliament steps in. And we relied entirely on the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, to which India was a party, a UN convention. Parliament enacted the law for protection of women against sexual harassment after the judgment of the Supreme Court. So it works both ways. You mentioned the marriage equality case. I'll just briefly deal with it so we can accommodate a few more questions. In the marriage equality case, the Special Marriage Act was enacted by Parliament to allow for marriages between couples professing different faiths, right? A Muslim marrying a Jain, a Hindu marrying a Zoroastrian. Now, the act which Parliament enacted, the Special Marriage Act, uses the expression man and woman. Now, the petitioners who said that, well, people who are LGBTQIA plus individuals belonging to the queer community should have a right to marry. They didn't challenge the law, because if the law was struck down, the benefit which would be available to couples belonging to different religions would no longer be available. But they said that you read man and woman as man and woman and woman by interpretation. Now, there were several complexities in the process. one of the complexities was that, apart from the fact that the law said man and woman, there were different degrees of prohibited relationship. That a man cannot marry within certain prohibited degrees. A woman cannot similarly marry within certain prohibited degrees. The age for marriage was different. There are issues of succession to estate, of adoption. So these are extremely complex issues. And across the world, except South Africa, where the courts legalized same-sex marriage, in other countries like the UK or the US, the legislature stepped in, first by recognizing the right to unions and thereafter recognizing the right to marry. I was in a minority, by the way, in the same-sex marriage case, where me and another colleague said that you must at least recognize the right of same-sex couples to have unions, civil unions, even if you don't give them the right to marry. But 3 of my colleagues in the 5-judge bench disagreed with us, and therefore our view remained as a view in the minority.
Good evening, sir. Myself, Advocate Gayatri. My question is, what are the qualities you think the future leaders of India require to achieve our constitutional goals?
Now, this is a very difficult question. Again, I have to look into the future. But as I look at the future today, and with all the limitations which I have as a human being, I think the key quality which a future leader will have to possess is to be firmly rooted within and then look beyond. Because what today's movement globally is doing, despite, of course, backlashes in different parts of the world, is to bring together global humanity as one composite whole. Now, you find, for instance, in different countries in the world, and I need to make references to particular nations, where there is a feeling that you must focus on your own country or community. Forget about the world. Therefore, for instance, the US is backing out of several international conventions. You know that they have, abolished their contribution to US aid or the membership in the World Health Organization. But what a lot of things have done in the recent past, look at COVID-19. What did COVID-19 really tell us as a global humanity? COVID-19 taught us that no individual nation is insulated from the rest of the world. Our problems may be local, but they are interconnected to the rest of the world. What is climate change doing? Climate change is telling us that, say, a country like Maldives or our low-lying areas or Fiji, countries which have very strong, the island nations in the Pacific, they are not in that sense creating the conditions which are threatening their existence. The conditions which threaten the existence of a community are created somewhere else. Or look at artificial intelligence, the rise of social media, and the impact of social media in the polarization of debate. It lies beyond communities, regions, and even states. And therefore, I believe that future leaders in that sense, if they have to find answers, have to be clued in to the ground reality in our society while having an eye on the wider humanity which lies beyond our community.
Hi, good evening, sir. While you are declaring a judgment, what's purely relies on the understanding of the case, or you will depend upon a divine entity to sort it out that case?
Sorry, I didn't get the question. When you are deciding a case,
no, while you are declaring a judgment in a case, what relies on, what you are really depend upon, your understanding of the case, or you relies on a divine entity to sort it out that case?
It's very simple actually. By training, you are taught as a judge to hear two different and conflicting viewpoints. And speaking for myself, until the last word in a case is said in court, the case is open for dialogue. And you'll be so surprised as to the number of times when you realize that your initial impressions of the case, we all read our papers before we come to court, but you realize so very often that your initial understanding of a case was so completely at variance with where the truth really lay. Now, the finding of the truth in a case is a process which is evolved through a conflict of dialogues between two people, two sides in a court. Having heard those cases, you look at the law, you apply the law, you apply fundamental constitutional values, and then you decide, the higher you go, particularly the Supreme Court, what is the impact of a particular view which you are taking? Will that have an impact on the wider vision of justice for our society? And that's where the human element comes in the interplay or engagement of law, the constitution, with the facts and the arguments in a case.